The next topic is a panel, and it'll be moderated by David, and we have Wency and Alex and Tim with us. And the topic is focused on a culture of cybersecurity, and the question is really, what does that even mean these days, especially after we've heard from a slew of speakers that have talked about the diversity and the uniqueness of being a cybersecurity professional. So, David is our moderator, and David is the ADM of the Digital Experience Division in government. And his team has been working for a number of years, working with various program areas and policy areas in government to design and engage with citizens to design services and products and policies with them. So it's a pretty unique team in government, and they leverage government's main web presence to provide various engagement opportunities for citizens and topics. And in addition to that, David is also responsible for the technology services for government's public communications and, David is accountable for the tech for government communications and public engagement, which is an agency within government. And one of the things that David's team has been working on for the last couple of years is all of the public information on COVID-19 and the vaccination program, which you've probably seen on various social media avenues over the last couple of years. Before joining government, David has worked in various consulting and project roles with the UN, with the province of New Brunswick, the federal government, and even down in New Zealand. So welcome, David. And I just want to take a minute to introduce our panelists, Wency Lum. So Wency is the Associate VP, University Systems, and she's the Chief Information Officer at the University of Victoria. In this role, she's responsible for the institution's IT security, policy, governance, and projects to enable UVic's academic research and administrative functions. She also leads the operation of Arbutus, which is Canada's national research cloud platform. In addition to these roles, Wency has led various technology projects, business transformation, and information security across multiple sectors, including the BC government, the US private sector, and the UN, to name a few. Thanks, Wency. It's good to see you again. And I'm going to shift to Tim. So Tim is the National Director of Marketing Development and Strategic Advisory Services at CGI, and he has more than 40 years of operational experience in the IT and physical security realms, working to design and implement security programs using a risk-based, business-focused, and highly pragmatic approach. His cybersecurity work includes working with Canadian Pacific Railway, Online Business Systems, the City of Calgary, EPCOR, Bell Canada, Suncor, and the Government of Alberta. As a self-proclaimed enterprise security risk management evangelist, Tim has a master's in security and risk management from Leicester University. So welcome, Tim. And last but not least is Alex MacLennan, the ADM and Chief Technology Officer for Government. Alex leads the Enterprise Services team in Citizen Services. And as the CTO for Government, Alex is responsible for enabling government to deliver services to citizens by providing high quality, secure, and cost-effective management and technology services. So I'm going to hand it over to David, the moderator. Over to you, David. Thank you.
Thanks, Savannah. I really, really appreciate it. And I think hopefully by the end of this, we're all going to become self-proclaimed enterprise security evangelists. It's great to be here, and really lucky to have this panel. We've had an opportunity to connect a few times in advance of all this, and Wency and Tim and Alex have some really great stories to tell. And also from all of you, we've got, I think, till about 12:15 together. So there's going to be an opportunity for questions. So get thinking about some things that come to mind for you as we're thinking about culture and culture and cybersecurity in general. It's a really interesting space because, culture is sometimes can feel a little bit maybe abstract or ineffable, but we recognize it when we see it because it's all about the things that we say and the things that we do in the organizations that we work in, and how those things change and how we think and how we work together is fundamental to being able to create good organizational cultures that include good security practices as well. So it's I think, are really expansive conversations, and there's a lot of creativity and wisdom on this panel. And as we get going, I wanted to say too, I'm part of this conversation. I'm on the territories of the Lekwungen peoples, the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations, and I think one of the things that I've been thinking about in grounding myself here, was, and thinking about security, was also thinking forward to the Moose Hide Day, which is happening on May 12th here in Victoria, which is about men stepping forward to end violence against women and children and girls in particular. And you can see Alex is wearing his moose hide pin, and I wanted to reference that as an important component about grounding our conversation and how security works, and all the different ways that is, and how safety in all these different populations is a big part of our conversation here. So thanks for everybody for coming, and to Wency and to Tim and to Alex for being here. And I guess I think want to open up with some broad questions. And Wency, maybe I'll start with you. Just thinking about this question about security and culture, what do you think the security industry looks like these days on this question? Like, what do you think some of the big discussions are right now?
Well, for me, I think of the cybersecurity industry in a couple of compartments. So there's solution providers, there's consulting and advisory, and then there are defenders like me that work inside of an organization. And then overlaying all of this, you've got for us in higher ed, a complex regulatory and legal environment where government agencies play a role. So in my defender role inside the university sector, I see that cybersecurity, the industry is clearly growing and growing exponentially. And, we have some unique circumstances inside universities. As we saw inside, like during COVID, we had research that became front and center in terms of protecting research, securing research, and research as a target, right? A lot of the COVID-related vaccine stuff and all of that work was actively being targeted by bad actors. And the other pieces are, we had the major shift online, and that increasing number of technologies that were being implemented in rapid succession and accelerated, especially during recent events in COVID, as well as like a shift to remote work that created a blind spot in our defenses. So, there's a lot of complexity that all of this creates in the industry. And then the culture piece is around like, what norms do we accept in all of this change? And, what kind of behaviors do we want to incent as all of this stuff is going on? And what do we need from all of the different roles within our institution to enable security? And I'm just curious, like in terms of passing back, the floor to another speaker, Alex, your role in government would have seen that same kind of rapid acceleration and change. And I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Oh, this is making my job easy. Thanks, Wency. Alex, take it away.
Yeah, I can make some comments on that, and everything you've said for me resonates, Wency. And I think when I look at the experience from my team and a bunch of my partners across government, and a lot of the conversations I'm having with people around cybersecurity, there's just sort of an acknowledgement that everything is kind of changing on us in multiple ways. You referenced how, the scale of growth in the industry. We're looking at one of the most rapidly, if we look on the cybercrime end of things, one of the most rapidly expanding industries on the face of the planet, and one that drives enormous wealth. At the same time, organizations everywhere are fundamentally shifting the way that we enable and support IT digital services as we transition to cloud spaces. And at the same time, we've got a populace who has been shifting their relationship to digital, and particularly digital institutions and government, for many, many years. And, maybe 10, 15 years ago, we were in conversations about, hey, how do we shift, people's interaction with government to an online digital space, and what are all the benefits of that? And over the last few years, particularly as we saw the pandemic driving people more and more to critical online services, we have a populace that is moved beyond comfortable in that space and has a high level of expectation around access to information, their information services online. Just a very simple example. I recently had a bit of an issue with my mobile device and lost all of my information. And then I had to go into a restaurant and didn't actually have the access to the tools I needed to get into a restaurant because they lived on my mobile device. So all of us, that's a very simple thing, but just all of a sudden to say that this is not niche, this is not on the side. Human interactions, resident citizen interactions with government are happening primarily in a digital space. And so access becomes such a primary question in security. And I think it's that shifting the model to how is security enabling a different relationship and a different set of services with the public than we have done in the past. So those are the types of things that pop up for me.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Alex. And Tim, I know this is a passion area for you too. So just building off what Alex was just talking about there, can you talk a little bit more about what, as an industry, what security, how it needs to be thinking about the question, the point that Alex just made? How is it an enabler? What does that look like? What are the elements of folks who are participating in the security industry? What do they need to be doing? And how do they think about their culture?
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for that. And thanks for the other panelists for setting this up. So over the last, I look back on my career, what I've seen in the last 40 years or so is that there's this change now in the approach that we're seeing security, the lens that people look at security, and more importantly, what we have to create as practitioners. And what I really appreciate is that we're now looking at a different way of approaching this security equation. Years ago, we had, I remember being able to say no to a project and it would stop. That doesn't happen anymore. Never. That'll never happen again. And you know what? I'm thinking back to that time where it probably never should have, because the opportunities that we're providing to our organizations, to our citizens, to our clients, etc., all focus on this idea of they have a requirement to get access to information, and it's our job as security professionals to make that access as easy as we can, as secure as we can, but based on the risks that the organization's willing to accept. And I think now we're getting into those discussions of what's that level of risk that you're willing to accept. We haven't been able to get to those discussions before, because in some cases, I remember not being invited to the project meetings, or having organizations or teams within an organization go around security because we were the guys that got in the way. Well, now we need to understand that we're there as part of that equation to be successful. We're there to make that access as easy as we can and as secure as we can, which that complicates the issue, but it creates a path for us to grow as security professionals. So now we have a chance to actually talk to the business in business language, focus on the risks that we're facing from that business perspective, and try to understand what are the goals and objectives that the business has, and how can my department, how can my security team, how can I, as the chief or the chief information security officer, enable you to achieve those goals? That's a different conversation. That's one that we haven't had and haven't been able to have for quite some time. Now it's at that space where we're going to have those discussions moving forward.
Yeah, thanks. And Wency, maybe you can take us in a little bit deeper. So Tim's talking about, you're nodding as Tim was talking about those conversations with the business area, right? And tell me, in your experience, are you seeing a cultural alignment there around the importance of security and in those conversations? What's it look like for you in your organization and having that type of discussion about risk?
I think that in universities it's a little different. There are certain areas that are easily aligned to security and risk. You think finance departments, right? The administrative functions. And then there's kind of a continuum of, the teaching component came along, and then research was kind of the area where, security awareness really became prevalent like I said, during COVID. And it was because there was such a strong media campaign and government outreach to capture all that. Because philosophically, in universities, you want your research enterprise to be open, right? It's about sharing data and all of that. So they don't think about locking it down right away. And so the culture was about making people be more risk aware. And what I saw changing when I knew things were moving in the right direction is that, I have an amazing CISO and he gets consulted on, initiatives or he gets brought into the loop on things. And that's when I know that the message is getting through to people.
That's good. Alex, what about you? What are some examples of like how maybe different organizational cultures are meeting, or what you're experiencing in that conversation around security and how we manage risk within the organization?
Yeah, well, and part of what Tim was saying really resonated to me as he's talking about sort of project management approaches and governance and project management and the role of security. And I think that part of this story is not simply about security, it's about a shift in ways of working. And I know that all organizations are dealing with this in one degree or another, but many of us are shifting to a way of developing services and applications and experiences for our consumers that isn't a highly structured waterfall project where we go through multiple different steps of assessing risk management, evaluating business requirements, and then ultimately failing in delivering the thing that we want to deliver. We're all moving to a place where we're trying to find ways to be more agile, to be more product focused, to be more user focused, to be driven by evidence. And a lot of what we're pursuing is moving to a place where we have, and I know, David, you've done a lot of work on this space in government as of others, of creating relatively autonomous, self-directed teams that are multidisciplinary, driven by evidence, driven by involvement with their users and their needs, and are striving to build products that meet those needs and that continue to evolve. So when you look at that, whether we're talking about information security or risk management or finance or policy, I think the thing that we're seeing is these things can't be separate to that team. This can't be a function that sits out somewhere. There's dichotomy there. If you're trying to create an autonomous team that's driven by evidence and is pursuing a product that meets people's needs, if security is one of the aspects that needs to be captured in that, and it is, then security folks need to be part of that team, much like you would say in a policy space, right? We can't have information technology be developed abstracted from policy. So what's the answer to that? Is it more governance tables? No, it's bringing policy people into the process.
Don't we all love governance tables, Alex?
Well, I love governance more than the average person, but I also recognize its limitations. Yeah. And so I think this is one of the shifts that is not just about information security, but to Tim's point, it really does drive a shift in attitude and behavior for people that may have found themselves in a position historically of making binary decisions at go, no go milestones about the next step. That's no longer the way that we're developing services and applications. And so I think collectively for all of us, but in particular within this conversation for information security professionals, it's about, okay, well, then what does it mean to be someone that is bringing information security expertise to that type of multidisciplinary team that is driving after products? And I don't know if the others have some thoughts about that, but I think that's one of the tremendous shifts in delivery that we all need to wrap our heads around.
Yeah. Tim, anything you want to pick up on there? I see you nodding along.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, so Alex brought up some really great points. And I think that's where we're starting to see, we're talking about culture within cybersecurity. And part of it is the practitioners within cybersecurity, the profession, that now we need to start changing culturally how we manage our approach. And it's becoming that advisory role or that consulting role, as opposed to that, the binary yes-no role. Now it's, how do we spend our time? How do we understand our organization? How do we understand the business or what we're trying to achieve within that organization? And how do I provide like a trusted advisor role to that team? How do I give consulting expertise to that team? And then let the team or the business or the executives decide what's the level of risk that they're willing to live with, right? That becomes the change. And it's a cultural change for us because, I'm going to date myself. I remember when I could secure a system by following the black coax cable to the mainframe. That was awesome. I really appreciated that because it was easy, right? That isn't easy anymore. So with the complexity that we have with the technology and what we've seen, this transformation we've gone through probably the last 5 to even just the last couple of years, what we've seen from a transformative perspective, it really means we have to step up our game. From our perspective, we really have to become those advisors, and we need to listen to the business. We need to provide that empathy back to them with the goals that they have to achieve, still keeping in mind what we have to protect from a security how do I create and maintain a resilient organization with a security mindset and still provide that trusted advisory role back to my organization. That's what the new role that a CISO has to face. And that's something different than when that role first came out about 20 years ago. That role has changed now to something a little more empathetic, focusing on the human element and trying to figure out how do you balance between, oh my God, this is really horrible, to the business still has to roll. Right? This is why I'm happy to be back in consulting. I'll put that out there. Right?
Well, hey, Wency, talk about, I saw you nodding too, like you maybe talk to us a little bit about some of the skills that you see. Like if you agree with what Tim's saying, like do you see what are some of the skills that you're seeing for folks who are in the security industry right now to kind of align with the direction that you're all talking about?
So I think there's business acumen that's starting to emerge in CISOs or needing to, and that's sort of the thing that I look for. Like I have the unique privilege of the way universities work. I work with a lot of the CIOs and CISOs across Canada, and the ones who are successful at this understand like the problem solving business stuff, as well as having like some kind of very deep technical expertise. And I totally pick up on your theme, Tim, about being a great advisor, right? I always think of the role as, an advisor or an advocate for security, and those kinds of, being able to move an initiative forward, and all of those skills are important. I don't know if we want to talk about hard skills as well. Like I think it's like a total package, right? Because I think, data is one of the untapped pieces of cybersecurity. You've got all these logs and things that have to be figured out, and you need to understand trends and all of that. And I think application security for me is on my list of, it's hard to find really good people who can do that.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. One of the areas that's a real passion for me is, and Alex was alluding to it, like there's the question of solving problems for a business, but there's also a question of solving problems for people, and people are really diverse, right? Like and can you talk to me? One of the areas that I really care about is how the things that we create, the products that we create, the things that we do are also accessible, right? They can be used by people of all kinds of diverse ability. Maybe they arrive in multiple languages to help connect with people. And that was one of the things I really learned a lot about during the COVID-19 pandemic, was to try and get information to people in multiple languages. Where does security kind of sit in that kind of area of helping services be accessible, helping services connect with people in different populations? When we think about culture, how do we think about people coming from different cultures and being in different places and raised in different ways? Can you talk a little bit about how security might fit in that idea? Maybe Alex, I'll go to you first.
Sure. Yeah, I got a couple of thoughts, and I might sort of deviate a little bit, but come back to it, David, which is, I love what you're raising there about access and the role broadly of access for security. And sometimes jokingly with my team, I'll say the easiest way to maintain our security is shut down the network, right? Then we know, okay, that's it. But that's not what this is all about, right? The reason we exist is to create safe access. If the reason was just simply to protect, that's easy. The harder part is creating safe access. Now, I think what's also interesting when we start talking about skill sets, I think there is, it is hard to find people with lots of different disciplines. But in some ways, the technical controls are much more straightforward than the human controls. When we often look at where security will fall down, it is on the human side. It is about the people that are interacting with systems who may or may not behave in the way that we expect them to. And I think there's a whole bunch of things that are at play there. One is, my team runs phishing campaigns. There was at least one person on this call that got caught by the last one. Why? Because he read his email on his mobile device too quickly and didn't pay attention. That's a human behavior, right? There's no system that's going to amend that. But the question is, if we start thinking about the human beings that are interacting with our systems and what we need from them, what we need them to understand, what behaviors we want them to pursue, the context they need to have to be secure. And that is, I think, where it starts coming into a little bit of what you're talking about, David, is the diversity of people that are coming at the systems we're creating. If we are thinking, and we have in the IT space, shockingly, at times in the past, dealt with the elastic user, i.e. ourselves, as we think about the systems we construct, well, we're not representative of the demographics of people that we're serving. There are people coming from different language skills, that are coming from different cultural contexts, that may have a different relationship and understanding of government and its role than people traditionally do in Canada. We have people that may be learning different ways of interacting with government, or God forbid, that don't inherently trust government, given where they've come from or their culture or context. So when we're talking about systems development and security, there is a trust quotient that needs to be built there. And that trust quotient is about shared understanding. It is about shared access. In order to get there, I think one of the big things that we need to look for from a capability, but also a focus area for our cybersecurity professionals, is a deeper understanding of how we understand the diversity of the people that we serve, and how we start to, dare I say, codify their needs in a way that allows us to serve them with the solutions that we're creating. And so I think there's a broad range of things. And sort of my final point there is, I believe the risk in not exploring that area is if we continue to design and define systems from one archetype, then those systems will fail, because users will not behave the way that we expect, because of their language or their context or their understanding of that interaction.
Yeah. Wency, any thoughts from you?
I was listening to Alex as he was going along, and the point I liked best what you said, Alex, that captures what I'm trying to do. It's the safe access, not protecting, or something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing. At a university, think about our diversity that we have, like international students, international collaborators, and you have people who have so many different roles. You may have somebody who is a student, a grad student, who's working as a staff member, but is also an instructor, right? And you need to be able to design systems that can accommodate all of that and the processes. I think the people quotient, or the people skills, are still lacking. It's not just cybersecurity, it's IT in general. Like, it's something that we as leaders have to keep advocating for and looking for in our leaders, so that we can amplify that effect. But in terms of accessibility, the one final thing I'll say is that, like, never before, as much as our time shifting to online education at UVic, was accessibility such a major theme for us in terms of making things that were secure and accessible. It was a major part of how we thought through our response.
Yeah. Tim, anything you want to, any points you want to make, and then we can transition a little bit.
No, thanks for that. And I think so. Wency and Alex brought up some just amazing points, and I think it's something that, as a profession now, the cybersecurity profession, there's an opportunity for us to mature beyond where we are today and start embracing that whole concept of what's the human element. and bringing in, principles like design thinking, or can I actually bring in the human quotient of what is it I'm designing and who am I designing it for? And like for many years, we designed projects or we executed on applications and systems development because we had a business objective to achieve, or we had data that we had to collect, et cetera. Well, now there's an experience that we're trying to create. And for many cases, Alex talked about it, David, you did as well, is what's your experience when you interact with the government? What's the approach that you want to take, or how do you want that user to experience that interaction? And then, to Wency's point, how do I keep that a safe experience? So there's work for us to be. I think we have work ahead of us. I guess that's the best way to put it. And it's a great opportunity to start looking. I think that's where I'm looking at now within CGI and with the clients that we're helping out, is how do we bring that human element? How do we start talking about it from the human perspective? Because it's at the far end of this, no matter how hard we try to get away from it, there's going to be fingers on a keyboard. It's really what it ends up with. So how do I want to shape that experience? How do I want to provide that level of assurance that the data you're getting access to is the data you need, nothing more, nothing less? And then how do I make sure that when you're done with that data, I'm able to make it safe and secure? I think that's the challenge that we get to face for the next 10 plus years.
Yeah.
David, can I just add a point? Tim just spurned something for me, and just thinking about design in this space, and I totally agree. Design thinking and systems thinking as tool sets, especially when we think about product focused teams, is really critical. And I think there's something also really important that Tim brought up there around the interaction between humans and the systems they're interacting with. And it reminds me of a story I heard years ago. I think it was on Spark with Nora Young on CBC or something. And they were talking about design thinking and tools. And they were talking about this Google engineer who very, very, very long time ago had created this payment interaction. This person had tried to optimize this payment interaction to the highest possible level, like just reduce the number of steps, like let's just get there. And this is like years before Tap and Google Pay. This was very early on in this space. And they did user testing and people hated it. They just bailed out of the system because they had no trust in it, right? They were expecting speed bumps in the process to give them a sense of trust in this experience. On the flip side, you can have people going into a process that if they experience bumps, they're going to try and find a route around it, right? And I think for security in particular, I think there is a really sweet spot that we need to find, right? We need to be in this place where we're not going to force people to go around the design of the security because we want them to engage in it appropriately. And yet we need to give them a sense of trust and security that, especially in the government context, that we're taking care of their information and their data and taking that seriously. And so I think there's lots of challenges in IT from a design perspective. I think security design is one of the more elegant, challenging spaces that people need to get into from a human interaction design perspective.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we're starting to get some questions from the audience, but I just wanted to ask Wency before we get there. Wency, we started to hint at some of the challenges in the industry as well. And then kind of right up against that were what we saw through the COVID-19 pandemic and a lot of the big shifts there. Can you talk a little bit like in this question of culture and like what we do, how we've operated before and how we need to operate, and then what happened within the COVID-19 pandemic for you that maybe either brought some of these things to the surface or were gaps that you were able to close or shifts that you made that showed some of the flexibility in the organizational response and the kind of shift in culture that you experienced in doing that work?
Okay. Maybe I'll start with kind of what higher ed looks like, some of our unique aspects. So we've got the principle of academic freedom, which underpins a lot of things that we do. And that means that faculty will not be restricted in any way for their academic and research pursuits. It makes really, introducing standards and things that you take for granted in government very challenging to do in higher ed. And then you have another concept in higher ed around openness, and I talked a little bit about this, right? You need to have collaboration for research and academia. So what changed and what happened? all of the awareness and the heightened sense of risk and the dependence on all of the technology that we implemented. Inside UVic, we called it jokingly the pandemic technology miracle. It was this amazing alignment of quick decision making, funding to address like technical debt, all sorts of things happening, and a really clear mission. Like my team rose to the challenge and delivered amazing stuff within like 6 months that people thought was impossible. And so that dependence on, wow, we really need all these online tools, people in executive positions, and we have our board that's always been really risk aware, like all of these things lined up really well. In terms of like what we actually did, it was more than inside UVic. It was the collaboration of all of the CIOs across the sector that actually, and the CISOs, to help move some sector initiatives, and all of that trickles back down to the individual institutions.
That makes sense. And tell me about, so you talked about the risk awareness at the board level, and then, but the shift in mindset that was happening. If you apply that kind of culture or security cultural lens to all of that, like what jumped up for you through that experience?
So I would say that when I first started, the cybersecurity conversation was kind of relatively, immature. Right. It was the sign of the times. And then it rapidly, accelerated. And where I see when you see progress is when like academic colleagues will pull you aside and say, hey, I'm really concerned about ransomware. What can I do to protect? Right. So and I'm not sure if I answered your question well, but like I see the slow pieces of, allies coming and supporting me on major cybersecurity initiatives, and people that will speak out against, having poor practices and help promote MFA, for example. And, seeing that in people that I wouldn't have expected to feel that support from.
So it's like really like a whole new wave of champions for security. That's interesting.
And that's what you need to make change.
Yeah, nice. Tim, Alex, any observations from you? So like COVID-19 exposed our gaps, put a reflection on our culture, or any experiences that you want to share from that time that really helped kind of show where we are, where we're going, help paint that story for folks?
I think we're still facing some of that right now. So during the pandemic, I was at a different organization. I was the chief security officer for the city of Calgary. So I had both physical and cybersecurity, and I had a chance to speak to, coffee wasn't the right beverage, but we had a club of chief security officers around the globe that met up every Wednesday evening, depending on the time zones where we were. We had a chance to talk about where we were seeing changes in our organizations because of the pandemic. And it's interesting to see how we found some technical debt in many of the organizations across the globe, and executing on that technical debt opened up a couple of other things from a culture and behavior perspective that we either weren't ready for or kind of caught us off guard. And some of it was the hours that we saw people at home starting to work, and the disparity or the variation of hours for people logging on. And then it became what we had to try to understand, from at least from that operational perspective, is the persona of somebody working from home versus working in the office, and the access to resources that were required, and how much work we were actually getting done at a work from home space. And we really did create that. It trained us or taught us or forced us to be more collaborative, because I remember I lost count of how many days, and you folks are probably the same, where you didn't get a break between meetings because you just went from meeting to meeting. And it was all about the different projects I had to get through and the technology that we needed, et cetera, et cetera. And it became, for me, it showed to me that there was this embracing security. To Wency's point, people started asking us to come to the meetings because they were worried about ransomware. They were worried about access from home. They were worried about somebody's machine being taken over. So that, whatever that fear was at the time of working from home, it drove a lot of changes to the way that we operated our business, our security business. And I think there was a benefit to that. And I think we're now, if we're smart security professionals, we're going to capitalize on that attention that we've received to now start growing out that trusted advisor role and being available for those meetings to help the business move forward. So I think part of what the pandemic taught us was to be more collaborative, was to focus on the business objectives and how can we keep helping the business move forward. And I think that, to me, that was great to see. It also meant there was a lot of turnover in the security space. We saw a lot of folks change positions. We saw a lot of cultural changes that weren't appreciated by some security folks and others. Right? So we saw that movement start. I saw it first in the security industry. Now you're seeing it with, quote, the Great Resignation. And it's because we changed our approach to security, and we changed our requirements and perspective of what a security professional needs to be.
So can
Thanks.
I just ask
Yeah, go ahead,
Tim,
Liz.
what you meant by that? So you're saying that you saw people leave the cybersecurity industry because they didn't like the people skills they had to bring?
No, they actually changed positions because they wanted that balance between the work and the life balance, where they didn't want to keep coming every day into a data center to do their role because they were quite capable of doing it from home. So we saw as organizations were not the ones that I was at, but other organizations around the globe where they were starting to ask people to come back to work. Those folks were looking for something else. And those roles started coming up where you could be a security professional remotely working for an organization in your basement. And that started this mindset change where we needed to be more collaborative and focus on our people skills. So yeah, it was an interesting change to see occur, and it's still happening today.
Yeah. Alex, what about you?
Yeah, a couple things that both Wency and Tim have twigged for me. One is certainly, all organizations globally had to respond in the pandemic, and I think that it would be, you could go across every institution and say, "Hey, did you have to go above and beyond and do things you've never done before?" And we all be like, "Yep, absolutely." So I think this is wonderful in one way because it's a shared experience in the response to the pandemic. Obviously, tons of tragedy and ongoing challenges that are experienced by everyone. And I agree with Tim. We're not through that yet. Those challenges continue on, and we're all continuing to learn how to live through that. I think a couple of things that stand out for me in the response is one, I talked at the beginning about the involvement of security in projects and the way that we create services for citizens. And what we saw, like many others, and David, you were right at the center of this, was the sheer speed of delivery meant that we had to work in an agile, iterative, product-focused way. There was no security review phase of the project when you've got 10 days to deploy or 15 days to deploy or 4 weeks to deploy. So you have the security team there throughout the process, early in on the process, and able to provide that advice and solutioning, because sometimes it's advice, and sometimes when you come up against a brick wall, it's the security team figuring out how you can solution and find that balance, but being there right at the beginning. So I think that was really, really critical. I think too, and I think Tim raised this around risk, or maybe it was Wency, I'm sorry. One of the two spoke about risk. And I think that one of the interesting things for everyone involved is we did stuff that we never would have done otherwise because the risk profile had shifted, right? You're looking against, if we don't get this done, people aren't going to get vaccinated and people might die. Or if we don't get this done, people might not be able to access, services in the private sector, and businesses may be harmed. So there was this immediacy. And I think one of the lessons out of that is, and this is not a cybersecurity issue, this is an issue in many bureaucracies and institutions, is we tend to measure the risk of doing something, not the risk of status quo. And I think that's a significant part of risk-based approaches we need to think about. It's actually getting a far more nuanced discussion around risk and what it actually means. So when you're dealing with a pandemic, all of a sudden that equation is really clear and it becomes very straightforward. We have to do this and we have to absorb risk because the risk of not doing so is so significant. We have to get more nuanced in that so that we don't need an emergency to focus us in a more nuanced risk-based conversation. And then the last thing that I think is really brilliant here, and I think in many ways our audience today is people in the security field, but it was the introduction, because of that speed and because of the immediacy and because of the involvement of decision makers so close to the work that was being done, we had exposure of security-related conversations to people who may not have otherwise ever been involved with them. They may have previously only been in a position to receive advice from their CISO or to read, a privacy impact or STRA, but they were in there having real-time discussions about the impact. And David, I know that you were in many of these conversations during our response to the pandemic. This or this. What's the risk either way? Where are we going to go? And I think that's another part of the message. And I know my CISO, Gary Perkins, loves to say security is everyone's responsibility. And I totally agree. But it's not simply about the doing the right things. It's about decision making, and it's about understanding real risk and trade-offs. And so I think those are some of the lessons that I hope, despite all the challenges, that we pull forward into the future and continue to build on.
Yeah, one observation, Alex, you talked about that kind of rapid decision making, and something that I found working with the security professionals I was lucky enough to work with. And they're close cousins, the privacy professionals, right? Being willing to kind of take a breath and say, yeah, good enough, was so critical for us to be able to make progress. And people were in a place where they really drew on their professional experience to kind of step past heavyweight analysis. Like, they were doing some, but they were also kind of looking at the patterns of things that we were up to, and really, I think, were really excellent in their willingness to step forward. And it's a different type of leadership, right? It was a kind of professional judgment that they were applying in those scenarios that everybody else could count off and anchor off of, right? So they were critical members of the teams that were putting these pieces together, because they were leaders. Right, and they knew their area, and they understood the complexities, but they were also making it simpler for a team of people to make progress.
Yeah,
we had very similar experiences to Alex of, having to deploy things really quickly and making risk judgments, and that magic of when you've got trust and highly skilled team members that can work along and just know and work in parallel. That was a critical factor of what I saw across other institutions, whether they could respond adequately and deploy new technology in time to respond to COVID or not.
Yeah, it's trusting each other sure makes a big difference. I think that was, if there's anything that I learned from the pandemic, it was teams that trust one another were the ones that were the most successful, but doing that consciously, right? And I think that's another for skills for our security professionals, that ability to build trust within teams, right? While also wearing the black hat when you need to look outside, right? To help keep everybody protected. I think it was really critical. If it's okay, there's some questions that have come in that I'd like to get to. And then we can maybe we could pull back to a few other things. It's kind of first question is a bit of a jump back to some of our earlier discussion around kind of the human side of security and its intersection with design and how we design security within the context of it. And it was a discussion about how, and Alex, I want to go to you first, just because I know a little bit about your background, about the role of psychologists and sociologists to help design the security culture in IT systems. I'd love to know what you think about that, because you happen to have a psychology background.
Yes, absolutely. And Gary Perkins, also my colleague and our CISO, has got a background in psychology as well. I think so. I think, and many other disciplines as well. But I think this is actually one of the amazing opportunities in the security field going forward. Is we continue to need, and there's some amazing technical talent and really challenging technical problems in the security space, and there will continue to be. And it's great that We've got people engaged in that space, but I think there is so much opportunity for diversity in the security field, whether that is coming from people that have a psychology or sociology background or an anthropological background, like the application of that type of research and thought to this, and any real critical thinking tools, right? Like philosophy, David, as an example, is a great space, because this is we are because security is so ingrained in everything we do and needs to be in the future in a highly interconnected world. We need to be prepared to deal with every aspect of those problems, and there's business aspects and human design aspects and governance aspects and communications aspects. Like, I think communications and security may be one of the great new spaces that needs to be opened up. So wow, it's just like I have lots of conversations with Gary Perkins around talent, and I think two things is, one is it's hard to identify people that couldn't contribute to the security space because it is so all-encompassing. Secondly, I do think our biggest challenge as an organization, or maybe a pair of challenges, to one, help those people identify that they actually could have an amazing role in that space, and two, how we support folks on what is probably a pretty daunting initial onboarding technical jump to be able to function effectively in what can be a highly technical space. So I think those are nuts to crack, but man, there's so many challenges here and so much that people could bring from different disciplines.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to frame it. Like, Wency, like, what are the disciplines that you're seeing? What are you seeing? Like, what are your kind of desires around that? Do you agree with Alex around that multidisciplinary side of things? And how do you see the technical aspects kind of playing into that?
Maybe I'll add another layer, and that's sort of the diversity element. Like, people of disadvantaged backgrounds or women may not feel that they're qualified or that they have a role to play. And so I think we play a role in opening that up and creating space for people to feel welcome. So kind of just thinking about what Alex said and what I can add to, the types of skills that I'm looking for on my team. I mentioned, business acumen and, the psychology aspect. Like, if you look at my bookshelf at work, it's not like network architecture or anything. It's influence, it's persuasion, change management, communicating for like that kind of stuff. Because changing behavior requires you to be able to make a really clear and compelling case, right? And that's hard to do for a lot of people that come from IT backgrounds. So I think that that's part of, I agree. Like, I think a lot of us need help in designing that and designing a process change for an organization. My job success for security relies on every single person, 22,000 students and 5,000 employees doing the right thing, the correct thing every day, right? That requires a lot of thinking in terms of, the culture, reward systems, and the technology and processes behind it.
Yeah. Tim, any observations from you? And then I want to ask the question about competing with the private sector. Go ahead.
No, fair enough. We could probably have spent the entire session just on this topic, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to change how we approach the security profession. And a couple of things. Me personally, I'm not that technical person anymore. I'm just not. I was actually joking with somebody a little while ago that I think I actually failed my first logic course when I went back to school to take computing science. I was horrific. And I knew at that point I wasn't going to be the coder that they were looking for with Apple. So I knew I wasn't going to be that guy. I'm okay with that, right? Because what I've taken from that is now the focus that I look for is what are some of the soft skills that we need to have within the security industry or the profession and someone representing the security profession. How can I find, there's this great opportunity. How can I bring in disparate understandings of the world around us and wrap it into a security approach? And I think we need to understand, look what happened to law enforcement and criminal justice when they started bringing in criminal psychologists and those who understood behavior of criminals. And how did that change the approach that was taken in the 60s and 70s when that first started, and really great, gained foothold and demonstrated its value to law enforcement and criminal justice. I think we need to look at the same thing here. Is how do we manage that type of integration with the different people's side of the house that we haven't looked at? We've got some amazingly smart folks, talented folks on the technical side. Some of the technology we've seen, the transformation we've made in the last 5 years have been just phenomenal. Can we bring the people side of this along with it now as well? So how do we involve the behavior of Tim in a system and understanding why I'm going and where I'm going? And is that the right place for me to be? Well, can we look at that from the human lens as well? And I think we have to get there, because that's that next maturation of the security profession, is getting to the human side and the human element and the behavior aspects.
Nice. Thanks for that. Alex, I want to ask you about recruiting talent. Like, it's tough out there. It's tough for everybody. How do we make sure we hire all of Tim's people into government?
If you work for Tim, my email address is
please stay. Right? Yeah, I'm trying to steal from everybody else. Yeah.
So a couple of things. I think, I've been having conversations, and we talked about this with Tim on our previous call, and I'm having this conversation with my colleagues in other jurisdictions and with the federal government and in the private sector. I can't remember what the exact numbers are, but the global shortage of IT talent is rated in the millions and growing by 10-15% a year. So I think first thing is shared challenge, right? Like if there's no fish in a pond, it doesn't matter which lure you have. And so I think this actually requires a concerted, collaborative effort across the public sector, academia, the private sector, because the actual question we need to answer is, how do we create more cybersecurity professionals? Not where are we getting them from? Like we actually have to do a better job of creating them. I think in the public sector, we have one benefit that the private sector can't bring, which is some people are driven by a mission to provide public service. And people in the private sector, our partners, obviously contribute to that and are an important part of that picture, but it's not quite the same. And so I definitely know we have people that work in the public service that could find, higher pay or bigger benefits in other organizations. But like many of us, they come to work because they want to be in public service. But there's lots of places we can't challenge the private sector, and the salary is obviously one of them. But I also think we need to broaden our sense around talent again. It's not just about how we get access to the talent that's in the market. How do we create talent? I think there's a lot more to be done across all sectors on upskilling. Who are the people that aren't in cybersecurity that should be? Who are the people that have retired from another industry that should be thinking about cybersecurity? Who are the co-ops that are in the business management programs or the communications programs that we should be drawing in? And I think that is, for me, that's the sort of first start is like a big tentative approach of like, we need more cybersecurity professionals. We need to bring them in. And if we can collectively do that across multiple sectors, then we can start having conversations about how you draw them to one organization or another. But I would say, and I think Tim alluded to this, what we're seeing is churn because there's not enough people in the market. People are just going to jump and they're going to keep on moving around. So I think two things. One, creating that space. And then secondly, when you do have people here, then you have to do the right things from a leadership perspective. And this isn't a security question. This is just a leadership question to create a work environment that fulfills people's needs, gives them the right purpose, allows them to do good work, provides autonomy and empowerment for them. That's true anywhere. So yeah, that'd be my sort of reflections on that, David.
Nice. Wency, what about you? Any thoughts on because you're not in core government, but the post-secs are kind of right on the edge of the public sector there, but in an interesting kind of place between private and public, and also creating the workforce of the future too, in a lot of respects. So, Tatu, what do you think about this question?
So, the draw for post-secondary and universities in particular around, solving the world's wicked problems like, climate and sustainability and indigenous issues and those kinds of things. And I think that kind of core mission can be invigorating for people who want to work there. The recruiting and staff development challenges, like, we have them as well. We're solving them in different ways. We hire a lot of co-ops because we work in close proximity to faculties that train lots of these students. And so we try and grab them when they're early and progress them through our programs or development within our department. And I think that one of the things that we do well in higher ed is thinking that ecosystem, like we will mentor each other's staff from different institutions, which I think is kind of cool, or we'll develop like leadership programs that are for the sector that people can participate in. But I think that broader, like thinking of the people across this table, we need to think of the ecosystem of somebody might start in higher ed, go to private sector to develop certain skills, come back into government when they're a parent, and then maybe move somewhere else, and how we flow people between us instead of thinking we're going to trap somebody for their whole life, because we know that's not how people are going to work anymore.
Yeah. And Alex, I know you've got to go a little bit early. So is there anything you wanted to give you an elegant way to sign off there in case you needed to jump?
Yeah, and sorry, folks, for having to jump. I do have a meeting that was booked that created a bit of a conflict previously, but I did see, I just wanted to, I think Wency's totally right. I think that's spot on as far as that approach. And I know that we did have a question around closing the pay gap between the sector and the public sector. I think that's a really challenging one, and one that we are engaging the public service agency here within BC government on a conversation about just how do we deal with at-risk streams in IT, including cybersecurity, and how do we build out, there's a lot of limitations in that space, just being honest, right? Like we are constrained in government about what we can do. But it's definitely a problem we have our eyes on that we want to start working on. And if I can just leave with this, I think, like, first of all, thanks so much for being part of the conversation, and so great to be here with Wency and Timothy and yourself, David. Really appreciated it and had lots of great thoughts out of it. And I just, for people participating, if I had you to take away one thing, is just that cybersecurity is one of the most fascinating, interesting, exciting industries out there. There's so much going on, and we obviously have people here today that are in that industry and loving it. I guess my message is bring your friends. Start encouraging others, and as leaders, let's show the way that there's a lot of space for a lot of people in this industry, and if we can get more people in this space, it benefits us all.
Thanks, Alex. I really appreciate your contributions today. Thanks for dropping the mic as you head out there.
Thanks so much.
Tim, just a question for you around this skills development question. Where Alex talks about this kind of whole sector approach that's needed, is there anything you're seeing that's exciting you out there, or things that challenges that need to be taken on, or actions that are already underway?
No, I think Wency and Alex really nailed it. And there's a couple of things I was going to add to this, is that, I like the idea of bring your friends, because that's amazing. The more we can bring in, that'd be terrific. But part of it too is we, as part of the leadership within the cybersecurity world, we need to start dropping some of the barriers that we're seeing as well. So to allow that diverse skill set, to allow the people who they may not have a very strong, solid technical background, but they have some amazing soft or people skills that can help us with the profession of security. So I think we need to be open to looking at those different types of experiences, those different types of the persona that's coming toward the cybersecurity field. There's enough work here for everyone. I guess that's the best way to put it. There's enough work for everybody. So we need to remove some of our bias as we look at candidates coming into the profession, and start bringing them in for what they can bring from the human element, from the design element, from managing projects, to looking at things from a human perspective, and from the technical lens as well. So there truly is enough room underneath this tent for more people. And it's on us as leaders to start providing those opportunities for people to come forward.
Yeah, what's anything else you want to pick up there? Or I was going to shift there's a couple of questions that have come in around risk and project management and things like that. Is there anything you want to add before we shift to that?
I'll just add one thought, and that is cybersecurity is not just about adding more people to the tent, but it's also an opportunity for people to lead. There's so many big problems to solve together.
Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, well, this is I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate your focus on dropping the barriers there, Tim, because those can be very, very real for it. And once he was talking about, particular demographics, women and people from different ethnic backgrounds, right, who can really struggle on that front. So I really appreciate you raising that. Okay, so one of the couple of questions that have come in. One about how project management is working these days, and another one that's about deciding the right amount of security during project development, like what reasonable security looks like. And I want those two things for me connect, because it's kind of how it should be baked into how you run the thing that you're making, right? And what are you observing out there right now? How are we doing on this question about how security risk gets balanced in the process of developing these projects?
Ooh, that's a good one. All right, so let me start. I'm just thinking that from what's reasonable security is what's the risk that's being faced by the organization. And I think that's where we really need to get better at understanding the risk that the project is addressing or bringing forward. More importantly, what's the risk to the organization's goals and objectives? So both of those are tied together. So that means that we need to be cognizant of what the risk appetite is for the organization throughout every project, and how is that project going to help the organization achieve its goals and objectives. So the reasonableness of the security controls you're going to put into place, are they there to reduce every risk that the organization faces? Because that's not going to happen. But if you're looking at how can I make sure that the project I'm putting forward has a chance for success, can help the organization achieve its goals and objectives, and what's the risk appetite for the organization, those things need to be included throughout the project itself. So you're right, David, the two tie together. And it just means we need to be better at understanding this concept of assessing the risk against the business goals, but the business are the ones that make the decision. Because if you left it up to security professionals, you'd be on a typewriter and a notepad, and I want your notepad, your paper notepad back at the end of the day. I don't have any appetite for risk, right? So you wouldn't have iPhones. You wouldn't, do you know what I mean? The technology you'd be on literally as a typewriter, and I want it back at the end of the day. So from my perspective, I have a pretty low threshold for risk, but the business may not. It's on us then as security professionals to adapt the way that we work within a project to meet the requirements for risk at that project and then at that organizational level.
Yeah, I'm thinking about Battlestar Galactica right now.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah.
Wency, and then I have one more question before I think we're about time to close.
Sorry?
What any observations there just about project management and risk management and how those are working right now?
So, Tim talked about, projects that have kind of, I think, a business function. And then so a lot of the other initiatives are around like implementing changes, like as part of a security project, like multi-factor authentication is one great example, or other things that you might need to do. And like project management, I think of as like one of the core skills that you need in a security team. How are you going to implement all of these big things and big infrastructure changes without good project management practices? So I think that's one aspect that we need to touch on. And then the other piece I think is important is just educating leaders in terms of what is a good business project enabled by IT look like, right? There's a risk component, there's a change component, there's a security component, and you need to be able to do all of those well.
It's a wide open space. It's amazing. I think it's really exciting to see all these things, how multidisciplinary security really is. I think it's really come to the surface here. I got one last question, and it builds on one that was asked about asking about creating a fun, competitive environment to assist in building cybersecurity talents. Okay, which makes me ask the question, what's the role of fun in our cybersecurity culture?
Holy, I'm going to let Wency start with that one, and then I'm going to jump in. So,
well, fun has to be part of the workplace, right? And within my department, we have a bunch of people who are, always laughing, and it's not that we don't take our jobs seriously. There's a certain gravitas that comes with security. I think that's inherent, but I think fun is part of the job as well. Capture the flag. I'm like that. I've never played that as a kid, so I can't speak to that.
Tim, last words to you, then we'll wrap up.
No, absolutely, and thanks. So I think For me, do you know where the fun comes is from the leaders that you have within the security group. And it really is the culture and the tone and the context that they set for their team. So, and I've run those capture the flag exercises internally and red and blue team exercises, you bet. And it can be fun, it can be competitive, but part of it has to be, and you nailed it, Wency, it's when you walk into that room, like when you walk into, and I've had this in other past lives, when you walk into that security operations center, what do you hear? Right? What do you see? Is everyone buried with their heads on their terminal looking at the world just in front of them on the screen? Or are they leaning over to the desk and asking somebody something? Do they have, they have pictures of their family and kids? Are they sharing about things they did on the weekend? What's the culture you're creating and the atmosphere you're creating in the environment that these folks have to work in? Because you're right, this is a difficult world to work within. This is a serious world to work within. People rely on us to do our job 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so that everybody else can have access to that system, that program, that application. So how do you find the way to reduce or release the stress for that and still give these folks that opportunity to be the professionals they need to be? That's on us as leaders to set the tone for fun.
That's awesome. Well, hey, Wency, Tim, thanks so much for a really, really interesting session. I really learned a lot about all the different ways in which we need to be thinking in the profession about what leading in security means right now, and all the different skills that are there that are really, really important, and all the diverse people that we need. So it's really great to hear about all those things. So thank you all very much, and thanks to everybody for listening and for your questions. And I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity to be part of today. Savannah, you're here. I can see you. So maybe I'll turn it back over to you for our next step.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Wency and Tim, for the panel. I really appreciated the sharing of the real life experiences, especially over the last 2 years, and I think the audience really did.